There's a reason so many people change relationship models and still remain unhappy. They move from monogamy to non-monogamy, believing they'll finally find freedom. Or they take the opposite path, searching for security, and then they realize the problem was never the model itself. It was something far deeper, something no one explains before you step into it. Because both monogamy and non-monogamy require very specific sacrifices. And those sacrifices aren't obvious until you're surrounded by them. One model forces you to erase parts of who you are, the other compels you to confront fears you didn't even know existed. And here's what few people truly understand. The choice between one and the other isn't about which is better, it's about which kind of internal suffering you're genuinely prepared to carry. And there's more. There's a hidden trap embedded in each of these models, one that only reveals itself when it's already too late. A trap that has nothing to do with jealousy, desire, or commitment. It has everything to do with something far more disturbing, the way you relate to your own identity. But before getting there, you need to understand what's really happening when you choose one path over the other. The first thing you need to understand is that neither of these models is natural. This goes against everything you were taught, but it's true. Monogamy isn't instinctive. Non-monogamy isn't either. Both are constructions, systems you learn how to operate. And here's the problem. You spend your entire life being conditioned for one of them, and by the time you realize there might be another path, you're already deeply programmed. Think about it. From a very young age, you were shown how love is supposed to work. Movies, songs, stories, all pointing in the same direction. Find the right person, stay faithful, build a life together, happily ever after. That script was etched into you before you even had your first kiss. So when you grow up and discover that some people live outside that script, your first reaction isn't curiosity, it's discomfort, because something inside you was trained to reject alternatives. And that's exactly where the first major illusion lives. People believe they're choosing monogamy or non-monogamy based on who they are, but in most cases, they're simply reacting to the conditioning they received. Some accept the default program without ever questioning it, others rebel against it, but not always for conscious reasons. Rebellion, too, can be a form of control. You're just doing the opposite of what you were told, not necessarily what actually makes sense for you. Here's what no one tells you. Both models will test you. Not in obvious ways, but in deep places you didn't even know existed. In monogamy, the test is about renunciation, about being able to look at another person, feel attraction, curiosity, even a genuine connection, and deliberately do nothing with it. Not because it's wrong, but because you made an agreement. And honoring that agreement day after day, year after year, while part of you wonders what you're missing, is a very specific form of self-suppression. But don't make the mistake of thinking non-monogamy is total freedom. It has its own tests, just as brutal. The core test is about ego, about being able to accept that you are not everything to your partner, that someone else offers them something you don't, that your partner desires, seeks, and finds satisfaction in places where you are not present. And you have to do more than accept this intellectually. You have to make emotional peace with it, because your brain will torture you with images, comparisons, and the visceral sensation that you're being replaced. And this is where something interesting starts to emerge. In both models, what's really being tested isn't your capacity to love, it's your relationship with control. In monogamy, you exercise control over yourself, over your impulses, your desires, your possibilities. You become the warden of your own prison. In non-monogamy, you relinquish control over the other person. You allow them to exist outside your line of sight, outside your influence, in experiences that don't include you. So the real question isn't which model you prefer. It's this. Where do you need control in order to feel safe? Do you need to control your own actions, or do you need to control the actions of another? Because one of those will be challenged no matter which path you choose. And most people don't realize this until they're already deep inside the model, feeling the weight of what they failed to calculate beforehand. But there's something even more disturbing beneath all of this. Something that only reveals itself after you've spent enough time in either model. Something about the nature of human dissatisfaction. Something neither monogamy nor non-monogamy can actually resolve. The secret no one wants to admit is this. People don't leave monogamy because it doesn't work. They leave because they begin to feel like they're disappearing inside it. And people don't leave non-monogamy because it's too difficult. They leave because they discover that freedom without depth is just sophisticated distraction. Let's first talk about what happens in monogamy after the initial phase wears off. There's a psychological phenomenon almost everyone experiences but few can name. The feeling of becoming predictable. Your partner knows you so well that you start seeing yourself through their eyes, and eventually you stop surprising yourself. You stop discovering new versions of who you are. Because every new impulse, every exploration, every transformation has to pass through the filter of the relationship. And that filter narrows over time. This isn't your partner's fault, it's structural. When you promise exclusivity, you're not just promising not to sleep with other people, you're promising that your entire sexuality, your curiosity, your emotional growth will all take place inside that container. And sometimes the container is too small for who you're becoming, but you don't realize that right away. You just feel a growing weight, an unease you can't quite name. Now, non-monogamy promises to solve exactly this. It promises that you can grow, explore, and transform without being confined. And at first it works. There's a kind of euphoria in discovering that you can have multiple connections, that you can express different parts of yourself with different people. It feels liberating until it doesn't. Because what happens in non-monogamy is the opposite of confinement, fragmentation. You split yourself across people, across experiences, across versions of yourself that don't really speak to each other. And you start to notice that none of these connections go deep enough. Not because people don't want depth, but because real intimacy requires time. It requires sustained presence. It requires a kind of vulnerability that only emerges when you stop performing. And here's the brutal irony. In monogamy, you suffocate from a lack of novelty. In non-monogamy, you empty yourself through an excess of it. One model makes you feel trapped, the other makes you feel scattered. And in the middle of this impossible equation, there you are trying to figure out how to build something that doesn't destroy you in the process. The truth is that both monogamy and non-monogamy are attempts to solve the same fundamental problem. How do you remain whole while connecting with another human being? How do you preserve your individuality without ending up alone? How do you surrender without losing yourself? And neither model offers a fully satisfying answer. Because maybe the answer isn't in the model at all. Maybe it lies somewhere else entirely. Something people rarely consider before entering any relationship. Something about self-knowledge that if you don't have it, no model will ever truly work. And this is where the conversation becomes truly uncomfortable. Because most people don't choose monogamy or non-monogamy based on self-knowledge. They choose based on fear, different fears, but fear nonetheless. Some people choose monogamy because they're terrified of abandonment. The idea of sharing a partner activates a primitive terror of being left behind, of not being enough, of being replaced. So they make a deal, exclusivity in exchange for safety. But that safety is an illusion, because you can have exclusivity and still lack real presence. You can have someone's body in your bed every night and still feel completely alone. Monogamy doesn't guarantee connection. It only guarantees the absence of other people. Others choose non-monogamy because they're terrified of being trapped. The idea of belonging to one person sets off internal alarms, suffocation, loss of identity, a life wasted. So they seek multiple connections as proof of freedom. But that freedom is also an illusion, because you can have 10 different people and still be running from real intimacy. You can have access to endless experiences and still not be fully present in any of them. Non-monogamy doesn't guarantee fulfillment. It only guarantees the absence of commitment. Do you see the pattern? Both models allow you to avoid the real work. The work of understanding why you need what you need. The work of confronting the fears that are actually driving your choices. The work of building a genuine relationship with yourself before trying to build one with someone else. And that's why people switch models and remain unhappy. Because they change the external structure without touching the internal one. A man leaves monogamy believing the problem was limitation, only to discover that the real issue was his inability to be present. A woman enters non-monogamy thinking the problem was her partner's possessiveness, only to realize that the real problem was her own insecurity, something no amount of external validation can fix. The model doesn't matter if you're broken on the inside, and that's the truth no one wants to hear, because it's easier to blame monogamy for your sense of confinement than to admit you never learned how to create novelty within yourself. It's easier to blame non-monogamy for your jealousy than to admit you've tied your self-worth to the exclusivity someone offers you. So maybe the real question shouldn't be monogamy or non-monogamy. Maybe it should be, who do I need to become so that any model I choose is sustainable? Because as long as you're operating from lack, from fear, from an internal void, it doesn't matter how many people you have or don't have, you'll be carrying the same hole with you everywhere you go. And there's an even deeper layer beneath all of this, a layer about why relationships themselves are so difficult, regardless of the form you choose. The truth no one prepares you to hear is this: every relationship is at its core an agreement about which parts of yourself you're willing to sacrifice. The model doesn't matter. How conscious you are doesn't matter. The moment you decide to deeply connect with another person, you're negotiating what stays and what goes. In monogamy, the sacrifice is obvious. You give up exploring other connections, other bodies, other possibilities. You place a significant part of your sexuality and curiosity into permanent hibernation. And you do this hoping that what you gain in return will be worth it: stability, depth, shared construction. But there are no guarantees. You can sacrifice everything and still end up with a partner who is physically present but emotionally absent. In non-monogamy, the sacrifice is more subtle, but just as devastating. You give up the illusion of being everything to someone. You renounce the fantasy of finding the person who completes you, who fully understands you, who never needs anyone else because you are enough. And that renunciation hurts more than people expect, because deep down, everyone wants to be irreplaceable to someone. Everyone wants to be the final choice, not just one option among many. Here's what's really happening. You're trying to solve an impossible equation. How do you maintain your full individuality while merging with another person? How do you feel free and safe at the same time? How do you have novelty and stability simultaneously? And the honest answer is that you can't. Something always has to give. The only real choice is deciding what you're willing to lose. And this explains why debates about monogamy versus non-monogamy are so emotionally charged. They're not just about relationship structures. They're about fundamentally different ways of dealing with human limitation. Some people accept that they must choose between freedom and depth, and they choose depth. Others refuse to accept that trade-off and try to have both, paying the emotional price of that ambition. Neither is wrong, but both are confronting the same wound, the impossibility of having everything. And as long as you don't make peace with that impossibility, so long as you keep believing there's a perfect model that will give you security without confinement or freedom without fragmentation, you'll remain dissatisfied. You'll keep thinking the problem lies in the model, the partner, or the circumstances, when the real problem is your refusal to accept that every choice comes with a cost. And there's more. There's one final layer that, once you see it, completely changes how you think about relationships. Something about what you're actually seeking when you seek another person, something no relationship model can give you, no matter how many people you have or don't have. But before we get there, you need to understand why this search is doomed from the start. Because here's what no one tells you. You're not really searching for another person. You're searching for a version of yourself that only appears when someone looks at you in a certain way. You're searching for the feeling of being whole that comes when someone desires you, chooses you, validates you, and that search is endless. Because no person and no relationship model can fill a void that was never meant to be there in the first place. In monogamy, you try to fill that void with the exclusivity of one person. In non-monogamy, you try to fill it with the validation of multiple people. But the void remains, because the problem was never about how many people you have access to. The problem is that you're using other people to avoid the work of becoming whole on your own. And when you realize this, when you truly understand that no external model can solve an internal issue, something shifts. You stop searching for the perfect relationship and start building a version of yourself that can exist in any relationship without self-destruction. You stop asking monogamy or non-monogamy and start asking, who do I need to become so that my choices come from fullness instead of lack? So what hurts more? Neither one. What truly hurts is living disconnected from yourself, regardless of how many people you surround yourself with. What hurts is using relationships as anesthesia for problems only you can solve. What hurts is continuing to believe the answer is out there, when it's always been inside you. Monogamy and non-monogamy are just structures. What you do within those structures, how you show up, how whole you are when you enter them, that's what determines whether you suffer or thrive, and that's a choice no video, no piece of advice, no ready-made model can make for you. If this video made you rethink your choices, subscribe to the channel and leave a like, and in the comments tell me, which of these truths unsettled you the most? See you next time.